Hello everybody, I'm KC, and welcome to an edition of Let's Talk About, and welcome to the latest installment of To Infinity War and Beyond. And as you probably guessed, we're kicking it off with a movie that started a tidal wave in geek culture, Iron Man. Now, full disclosure, I actually didn't know much of anything about Iron Man, or any of the Marvel heroes for that matter, going into this. I just knew these movies were getting bigger, and Iron Man was the one that looked the most interesting to me. So I really didn't know what to expect when I first saw this. So you can imagine my surprise when the movie starts with our main hero getting ambushed, shot, and kidnapped by terrorists. It was a pretty intense opening for what I thought was just a funny comic book movie. Billionaire playboy and super genius Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr., is taken hostage by terrorists to build a super weapon for them, and he's severely injured in the process. After escaping, Tony devotes his life to trying to protect lives on his own, rather than manufacturing things that could hurt others. But that goal may be more difficult than he realizes. This movie really made me realize what makes these Marvel movies special, and looking back on it, it's very easy to see why. This movie was a huge risk. Outside of superfans, Iron Man hardly had any brand recognition. So instead of relying on the name, the studio just focused on telling its story on the big screen the best they could. And that's an attitude Marvel has kept to this day. And an attitude some other studios could stand to employ, but that's beside the point. The story of a powerful man being humbled and trying to change his ways is a story as old as time. Heck, I just did a whole video on a similar story. But for a movie under the Marvel banner, it's surprisingly down to earth, making it feel fantastic and futuristic, but also relatable and easy to grasp. And I think Tony Stark is a character with more depth than people give him credit for. Again, this was a pretty big risk. Robert Downey Jr. was still working on making a comeback into acting, and people weren't sure if he could do it. From what I understand, even most fans weren't crazy about him being cast as Stark. But like a lot of other things about this movie, it was precisely the risk that reaped the greatest reward. From the very first minute on screen, Downey radiates such a huge personality. He's cool, cocky, and confident, and completely owns it. This is a guy who knows he's brilliant and powerful, and he never lets you forget it. And a lot of that is carried on and amplified through Robert Downey Jr.'s performance, especially since, reportedly, the script wasn't even finished before filming began. So it's remarkable that the dialogue is as snappy, witty, and natural as it sounds. And all of that comes down to the skill of the actors, especially Downey, who reportedly improvised a lot. But with enough charisma, anyone can play the cool guy. What elevates Tony into something more is his transformation from someone who could care less to someone trying to make up for sins he didn't even know he was committing. I'll touch on this more in future installments, but Tony's arc of becoming a hero is pretty complex. He hasn't changed personality-wise, he's still a wisecracker and pretty reckless as shown in his first test flight. But when it comes to his new mission to protect people, even if he has to do it all by himself, he takes it very seriously. My favorite scene in the movie is when he dons the suit for the first time to save a helpless village. There's no one-liners, no jokes, none of those witty comebacks that Tony would become known for. It's just him standing up for people who can't defend themselves. And that is the first time he truly becomes a hero. He still has a long way to go, but his determination is clear, and it's performed just as marvelously as any one-liner. Sure, Tony's funny and cool, and so is Robert Downey Jr., but I don't think they could have picked a better actor to portray a man trying to rebuild his life into something better than him. It's really the whole package. But Tony wasn't carrying this movie on his own. While this is probably one of the smaller supporting casts a Marvel movie has had, it's still a very solid one. You have Pepper Potts, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, who is there to keep Tony in check, but also cares for him and has his best interest at heart, which is something he desperately needs. There's also who seems to be Tony's only real friend, James Rhodes, played by Terrence Howard. Now, I really like Rhodey, and Terrence Howard does a good job, though I will admit I prefer Don Cheadle's version of the character. I honestly can't imagine Howard in the War Machine suit, but maybe that's just me.
Next time, baby.
Then there's one of the most underrated characters in the MCU, Yinsen, played by Sean Tube. How is it that this man helped save Tony's life, both physically and spiritually, and sacrificed himself to do so, and is hardly ever mentioned again? That's not fair. He deserved more. Hashtag justice for Yinsen. And finally, our villain, Obadiah, played by a tough-to-recognize at first Jeff Bridges. Points to the makeup department for that, he looks good. I mean, there was also the Ten Rings, who... sure did exist. But Obadiah is the true villain here. In many respects, Obadiah is the best villain in the Iron Man series. He's an excellent mirror to what Tony could have become if he kept focusing on only his own well-being. His methods are downright despicable, and Jeff Bridges gives a very intimidating performance. That scene where he rips Tony's arc reactor out of his chest still gives me chills. But then he gets in the suit, and the menacing side slowly dissolves into a Saturday morning cartoon villain, which might have been fun if he was like that through the whole movie, but it's such a shift from what he was before that the movie kinda loses me in the climax. There are some clever callbacks, but it's just kind of underwhelming compared to what came before. Ironically, the weakest part of the superhero movie is the action-packed climax. But if it may be less than impressive, it still has something going for it. The effects are amazing, especially considering this was 10 years ago. I know I wasn't a fan of Iron Man before this movie, but I'd imagine it was worth the wait for hardcore fans to see the hero on the page realize this well. If the concept wanted to look even somewhat dignified, I think it's for the best that the first time it was on the big screen was when the technology was finally available to make it look as good as it does. The suit looks amazing in all its iterations, both in its physical form and when they switch to the CG models. From the light reflections on the metal, to the weapons, to especially the flight sequences. You really feel the weight in every turn, the gusts of wind rushing past. It's very eye-popping, and they really know how to shoot and choreograph it, even during nighttime scenes, which is freaking remarkable. I may not have been blown away by the final battle, but it still looks really nice. Overall, this movie was kind of a miracle. It really had everything working against it, at least in the public eye. It had an obscure hero, the script wasn't finished, no director would touch it until Jon Favreau came along, and it had a controversial lead. But by the end, the general public would go on from not caring about Iron Man to having it be one of the biggest blockbusters of the past decade. It really is weird coming back to this movie after everything that's happened with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The fact that there is a universe at all is thanks to this unusual first entry. Tony Stark, and by extension Robert Downey Jr., has basically become the backbone to a giant franchise that, not even a decade ago, was a distant dream. And it was the first movie to show that you could make an amazing blockbuster superhero film with three-dimensional characters, compelling stories, and astonishing effects without relying on the source material being familiar in pop culture. And that is something Marvel Studios would prove over and over again over the next several years. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.